Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining this hands-on workshop on the I can't see the screen share on it. Oh, great. Yeah. So thanks everyone for joining our session on the Internet of Things hands-on type of presentations. I just want to remind everyone that for Oli's session, which is the IoT with the Arduino presentation, you'll need to have a Google account because he'll be showing you things to do. So if you want to try that, you will need a Google account. If you have one, maybe good time to log in now. If not, take 5 minutes to create one. So that's it from my side. Welcome, Emily, and welcome, Oli. Do you want to present yourself, Emily, first, and then Oli?
Brilliant. Shall I get started then?
Good.
Excellent. Brilliant. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining the session today. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for being invited to come and give a talk. I'm a researcher, artist, basically working within the field of electronic textiles, but around mainly accessibility and kind of arts outreach, but within the human-computer interaction capacity. So I've just done my PhD Viva recently, passing with minor corrections. So I'm close to becoming. Thank you. So I'm closer to becoming a doctor, which is very exciting. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about my own research, so what I've been doing for the past number of years. I'm also going to talk a little bit about electronic textiles within the context of outreach and engagement and I guess empowerment with participants. So talking about kind of my previous life before my PhD, but looking at some example projects as well. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to share my screen, so bear with me 1 second, and I'm going to get my PowerPoint presentation up. So let's have a little go. This is always good fun. All right.
Maybe if you could stop sharing your screen, so Emily would have like a bigger space on the main screen, I guess.
Cool. Can everyone see that okay?
We can see yours, yeah. I don't know whether you can just double click on it so it takes the whole screen.
Oh.
I guess you could do that.
Yeah.
Okay, I think any of us, I mean the attendees may just need to double click for the full screen.
Cool.
Yeah, we can see it perfectly.
Brilliant. Perfect. All right, so I'm going to get started then. All right. Yeah, so it says that I'm going to talk a little bit about empowerment through making and technology and electronic textiles. So what do I do? So my background is very much about teaching people how to be creative with technology, so combining mainly with physical computing, with hardware such as Arduino boards, with electronic textiles and creative design. So this has involved doing a number of different workshops at places such as the V&A, the Tate, the National Gallery, but always with an idea to teach people how to work with these skills as well as conceiving a creative project, and very much combining crafting with computer programming, with circuit making as well. A lot of the work I've done previously to my PhD has been very much about outreach, so perhaps working with communities who might not always have access to these sorts of technologies. So for example, what I'm showing on the screen right now is an image of a little girl interacting with a sensor created from willow, but combined with conductive yarns and non-conductive yarns to trigger sound on a bare conductive touchboard. So very much going towards this idea of how can we combine kind of natural materials with electronic materials. And this was actually in the context of a forest school. So very much responding to their kind of normal environment that they would be in every week, and making something which perhaps they could use as an arts installation within the context of their weekly workshops. I've also always been working on my own, I guess, kind of practice on the side with my research and with the kind of workshops I've been doing. So learning skills such as weaving. So the image on the screen shows some woven swatches with LEDs, light emitting diodes woven within them. And this was actually in preparation for a workshop at the V&A, working with a friend whose whole PhD research very much revolves around how you can embed electronics into woven structures, a lady called Dr. Priti Vija. So this is something which I've always been very passionate about myself. How can I sort of learn skills and then, I guess, relay them to participants within a sort of, I guess, participatory making sort of context. A lot of the work I've done has involved going into communities and encouraging people to think about, I guess, like kind of like personal situations, where they live, where they work, what happens in their day-to-day life. This is an image from a workshop at an international school in Brussels a few years ago, where I went over there and worked with the kids to produce an e-textile sculpture, where they would record little bites of audio, little kind of oral history, I guess, kind of sound bites about their school, how they felt about it, how they felt about living in Brussels. And then when they touched the little sensors on the sculpture, you could listen back to their stories and what they were basically saying about that. So a lot of my work, including my sort of artistic practice as well as my PhD research, has very much been looking at this idea of self-expression for e-textiles and telling stories. As I said, on crafting technology ago, where I worked with a designer called Alan Waldock, and we were very much looking at how could we make, I guess, e-textiles or circuits, so also using things like conductor paint with paper and such. How could we make it accessible for the public? How could we create kind of craft kits which potentially one day you could just from a shop to make, I guess, electronic objects that were kind of playful and soft and engaging. There's quite a few Tinker kits available now on the market. We have people like Technology Will Save Us who sell wonderful, wonderful kits, but there's still not a lot of stuff out there which maybe involves more kind of crafting sort of methods. Which is kind of interesting. There's always obviously been a debate within the arts about kind of crafting versus art practice, but I guess also within electronics and that kind of more, I guess, kind of engineering focus. I guess perhaps kind of e-textiles or soft electronics are often not seen as something to make something like a like a learning kit from. But I think there's a lot of value in that. And so, as I said, a lot of my own work has very much been about kind of outreach and engagement and trying to empower participants to feel like they can learn these skills too and make stuff. But there is obviously a body of research out there already looking at this. So one project which was very inspiring to me for my own research was one by Carnegie Mellon University. And what they did was having a look at how you could work with girls from quite hard to reach backgrounds, and actually teach them programming and electronics through the use of e-textiles and wearable computing. And they very much found that week by week, as the girls worked with the technologies, their confidence grew, their creativity grew, and they very much engaged with this as a kind of STEM going on to kind of STEAM kind of subject, I guess. And then Misha Cardanis, who is an artist and researcher, she's done a lot of work with trans communities, LGBT kind of communities, I guess, and working with participants to make wearables which are used for performative purposes, but also choreography, and then doing the public display of people kind of wearing the technology and showing what they've done at art biennales, etc. Very much a research project working with kind of arts as well, and very participatory. And this is another one of my projects, working with an artist called Heather Faulkner. It's the project in Brussels, actually. But this was kind of first iteration of it, and it was working with a gallery up in Leicester called Phoenix, where, again, young people were sewing these little tiny e-textile sensors using conductive thread and putting them on a sculpture so that when you touch them, you could listen to their recordings about living in the city. So often when we think about e-textiles, we think about them as being very sort of visual, lots of LEDs, lots of kind of bright colours within objects or garments, etc. But there's a very kind of like tangible side to e-textiles as well. So of course, they're often used for kind of sensors or switches. We see things like the Google Jacquard project, where with a swipe of a hand, you can sort of answer your mobile phone just by touching your denim jacket. So we're starting to see these kind of technologies being woven more into our everyday lives and into our clothing, etc. And for participants who are blind or visually impaired, obviously touch is a very important sense, and there's a lot of technology that's been developed already for blind and visually impaired people, mainly for sort of practical applications such as working with your mobile phone, or this is quite an old example now, but quite a nice one. Things like tactile wayfinding belts, so that people can find their way around and navigate. But often a lot of this technology is sort of designed, I guess, for people and not with people. And there is a growing movement within HCI, I guess, for working with people with impairments or disabilities, where they become co-designers and they can actually think about how they want to use technology. And perhaps, I guess, like design technology, which fits in more within the idea of third wave HCI, talked about by Bodka. So this idea of kind of technology which is more for experiences rather than just for functionality. So that's very much where my research has been. And because I'm visually impaired people and just really textiles being very tactile in their very nature, I've very much been looking at the idea of, I guess, making through touch as part of my PhD research. Slightly before the PhD, of working on a research project looking at how e-textile making could be made more accessible for blind and visually impaired people. And I first started off working with my supervisor, Janet van der Linden, on a series of e-textile weaving workshops, where we looked at how we could work with different participants, teach them how to do weaving, and then just see what kinds of woven sensors they could create, which could be used with a computer to trigger sound. So I'm just going to have a go at showing this video. I hope this works okay and there's not too much lag. We'll see how it goes.
Around 360,000 people are registered as being blind, visually impaired in the UK. Many of them face difficulties when interacting with technology. The increasingly ubiquitous touchscreen relies on a mere swipe of a finger to access any information we have for blind users. Electronic textiles, or e-textiles, are threads, fibres, yarn, fabrics, which have conductive properties, with metals such as silver or steel being part of their structure. Due to their texture and their ability to act as sensors, which can be stroked, squeezed, or stretched, we felt that e-textiles could hold a lot of potential for playing a bigger part in technology for blind and visually impaired users, particularly for creativity as well as function. How might interactive tangible interfaces be created for blind and visually impaired people for the use of e-textiles? And how can this community work with us to think through what they would like to do with this technology? We ran e-textile weaving workshops with different participants in which they wove their own tangible interface that triggered sounds on a computer. We wanted to explore how blind and visually impaired people would go about making their own e-textile objects, what creative choices they would make during this hands-on process, and whether they would find the e-textile objects engaging. Our workshop setup consisted of different tables of conductive and non-conductive wools, fibres and threads that participants could choose from for their weaving, as well as small toy-looms ready for them to use. We also had a computer set up on which the participants could create. Our participants varied over various levels of sight and various levels of ability. We saw them use a number of different approaches to their making, with different creative decisions in the types of materials used, as well as weaving method. Participants experienced creative and exciting moment activity, describing certain wools as being like marshmallows, or others like a smelly beast. We observed the participants interacting with their pieces in different ways, including squeezing, folding, and touching them lightly. Many of the participants were at first afraid of the e-textiles. Concern quickly changed to enjoyment through the hands-on making process. When discussing with the participants what uses they could imagine for such technology as e-textiles, their suggestions included carpets to describe art galleries, a tapestry in your hallway full of different textures which would trigger different musical sounds, and something to be embedded within your duvet. Through engaging with blind and visually impaired people, most of whom who had never heard of e-textiles before, or even taken part in a craft-based making activity, we together began to imagine new uses for such technology. We were successful in combining a traditional crafting activity with a computational one, focusing on touch rather than the visual, and exploring play rather than resolving problems. Through providing a safe environment for people to offer their own ideas, we saw their confidence grow in problems of the here and now towards a technology design that was about delight and enjoyment.
All right, so I'll leave that there. So so this was basically a project which I worked on before my PhD. So very much kind of, I guess, preliminary workshop. Yeah, so like preliminary like research, very much looking at people's creative choices with e-textiles, how you could look at accessible making, what kind of associations people would make with the materials, and also looking at what kind of gestures people might use with sensors. So this was a very good starting point, but I very much wanted to, I guess, kind of push this research further and look at very much how participants could make, I guess, kind of other objects, perhaps combine audio that was much more personal to them, and also, I guess, create technology which they could very much take home with them. One of the issues, I guess, of doing the e-textile weaving workshops was that the actual sensor had to be hooked up to a computer and an Arduino board. So once they took the woven sensor home, it wasn't really, I guess, usable as a sensor anymore. So the PhD kind of research is very much looking at, I guess, progressed. So very much looked at a participatory making approach with visually impaired people using textiles, looking at accessible making and construction techniques for a modular approach, touch and association with materials, and I guess very much looking at how e-textiles can be used for self-expression and to express personal stories or narratives. And then very much moving towards how e-textiles could be used in interaction design in a more sort of open way, I guess, and very much working with participants in order to do this. So one thing which very much inspired kind of start of my PhD journey when doing preliminary studies in schools for kids with vision impairment was this idea of looking at objects of reference and how often facilitators use objects to represent events or perhaps sensory engagement, basically communicating in a tactile way to someone with a lack of sight what is going to happen, or, you know, what are we going to do now, or how can we sort of, I guess, engage in kind of playful activities or relaxing activities, etc. So I was very keen on this idea and thinking, oh, you know, could people maybe create their own, I guess, sort of objects of reference or objects of engagement through the use of e-textiles, so something which is very personal to that person. So the first stage was to start kind of iterating with prototyping and looking at what kind of technology could be used within these potential pieces. And after much iterating, we basically found that these simple re-recordable sound devices, the kind of ones you get in greeting cards, were very good because they were quick and easy to use. You could record a narrative or a story or a sound on them very, very quickly. And they could also be easily hacked and embedded into soft electronics in a very accessible way that could then just be plugged into a soft circuit quite easily using press studs. Tube yarn was used. So this is yarn that basically has a hole in the middle, so you can put conductive thread through it. So you don't have to worry about any short circuits with your wiring. Normally, e-textile circuits will be sewn, but that can be very, very fiddly for a lot of participants. And you also risk that it won't work. So this was a way to kind of safeguard everyone really, and just to look at a different way of circuit making as well. E-textiles buttons and switches were used. So this was to trigger sound on the simple soundboards. And this is just me typing with a very basic setup with it. I'm just going to show one of the first switches being used. So this was by myself as a demo really for the participants as a starting point for something that they could create. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a video process. I'm afraid that we are quite short of time, so it's 5 minutes. So I'll wrap up quite soon. But this is basically discussing, I guess, the workshop process with participants and showing some of the outcomes as well with the kind of work that they created.
Interactive e-textile art pieces by blind, visually impaired, using a range of tactile, non-visual crafting techniques, including soft circuit making using conductive thread and tube yarn, and hacking simple soundboards to incorporate soft electronics, including different tactile switch designs, to convey personal associations and stories in a way which is tactile and auditory. My piece is about a sea. Yes, this is a sea. Sea lights.
Brilliant. So this was research very much, I guess, carried out with my two wonderful supervisors, Professor Van der Linden and Professor Marion. And we worked with two groups of participants with two different settings, the Centre in Aylesbury and a contemporary art gallery in Milton Keynes, working with participants week by week over a 5 to 6 week period, learning about, I guess, telling stories through touch with fabrics, thinking about personal associations, thinking about how things could be brought in from the home, which has something very personal attached to them, and how those stories might be told. But then also how you could actually, I guess, bring work alive through making e-textile circuits, and combining this with different sort of crafting techniques. So looking at accessibility as well with making, so things that are very tangible, such as finger knitting or weaving, but then to create these art pieces, but then embedding electronics into them as well. So looking at, I guess, accessible e-textile making with storytelling, but very much looking at it within a participatory environment and what that sort of means. There's a growing body of research which goes across different disciplines, whether that is e-textiles or traditional textile making or art practice, where people are more looking at this whole kind of like participatory making kind of idea, which is something talked about by Emma Shercliffe and Amy Holroyd-Twigger within their research, and just how precious it is to be in an environment with making in order for people to learn from each other, as well as from the facilitators, and to share knowledge and skills and such. So these are just some of the other pieces that were created by the participants within the workshops. And that was one of the exhibitions at the end. And I'm going to wrap up now because we are literally before 2 o'clock, and it would be good to have a few kind of questions. My PhD was very much looking at e-textile sensors and switches could be used in storytelling, so how people could use the within a kind of setting to enhance the experience, I guess, and very much for visually using, but then very much discussing with them how this could be taken forward and how they might want to use this as well. I'm not going to go into detail about this because we don't have enough time, but once it's published, you'll be able to read my PhD thesis, and you can hear all about it then. So yes, so thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Emily. That's really interesting. I'm pretty sure you enjoyed working on this in the last. How long did it take you to do your PhD? Was it 4 years?
No, well, so I took maternity leave for about 10 months as well, because I had my first child during it. Yeah. And do another baby over the next week as well.
So good. Good luck. Good luck with that. That's really interesting. Thanks so much. Are there any questions? Any questions? I can't see any on the chat box. Creative and physical uses of tech. It shows the importance of play in pushing tech forward. Yeah. Don't see any questions.
No, it's fine.
There aren't any. I guess we could just get Ollie to talk about the Arduino experiments. So welcome, Ollie. And as I said before, for Ollie's presentation or Ollie's experiments, actually, you need a Google account because he'll ask you to do things. So over to you, Ollie.
Thanks, Soraya. So hello, thank you for being invited, really. So my name's Ollie. I'm a lecturer at the Open University. And I was asked to revisit and represent a workshop I did a month or so ago with UK RAS for the UK Robotics Week. So this very much is a interactive session. And I'm hoping there's enough people paying attention to engage, because otherwise I'll be sat alone playing with virtual Arduinos. So the idea is.
Yeah, I was just saying we should engage, yeah?
Yeah. So just to give a little bit of background. So like I said, this was run during the UK Robotics Week recently. We had throughout the week, each day coming into the workshops. And this is the first of two. on the Arduino and IoT. And those people were from conceivable demographic. We had an excellent mix of gender, we had an excellent mix of age, some people being as young as 7, and some quite elderly people engaging as well. And it wasn't even just UK, we've actually got some people that came from the UAE at the same time. At the end of that, we've sent out, or we are sending out, I think it's 18 full kits of IoT devices, which we're sending out as prizes, which we're just putting together at the moment as well. So it was a really, really exciting project throughout the week of the UK Robotics Week. And the idea of this is very much to be learning as we go. So, as I say, my name's Ollie Houston. I'm a lecturer at the Open University in Computing and Communications. I used to teach 11 to 18-year-olds computer science. So I've got an excellent range of understanding of delivering education to people from 11 upwards. I do also run a small consultancy and development company. And my link with IoT and the Arduino in general is I'm not so much a maker as a fiddler. I tinker with these things. I'm not an expert, and I'm certainly not to the level that I believe Emily is with some of the amazing things she's produced. What I love doing is learning how things work and learning how to do things. And what I learned actually was there's some excellent resource out for learning about the Arduino, but there's also quite a few things that people want to do, that I wanted to do, which aren't so easy to understand, aren't so easy to find the answers to. So what I've done here is I've tried to actually put some very basic tutorials together to learn how to do some basic things. And obviously the second part of this, which is available free on my website, will go a little bit further, and I'm still building on that as well. So what fascinates me about devices such as the Arduino and the microbit and other similar microcontrollers is that it gives you the potential to dream and look how those dreams can come together and actually turn into something. So I love dreaming about what we could possibly do with these amazingly powerful little tiny computers. So the first thing we need to understand is what is an Arduino. And we've seen some of the things that we can do with microcontrollers in Emily's presentation. So the Arduino is a microcontroller. And it's a tiny, tiny little low-powered computer. I say low-powered, it's low-powered compared to your laptop or a desktop, but surprisingly powerful compared to the very, very first computers that were around. Microcontrollers have actually been around since the 1960s. And about 15 years ago, there was a university project, I think it was in Sweden, although I could be wrong with that one. And they led the idea of a very, very cheap device based on what we call an 18 mega microcontroller, a particular brand of microcontroller. And the idea was to have all the associated gubbins and bits and bobs that needed to run, all put together on a single little board with the power management and the easy way to connect input and output to it. And they put this all together, and they did this so that their students didn't have to go and spend some more engage in the learning they were delivering. But these things have exploded in terms of, well, mainly in terms of popularity. They don't generally explode in literal terms, thankfully. What allows people to do is go and actually start getting really creative in an affordable way. So people may have heard of the Raspberry Pi, and the Raspberry Pi is fantastic for what it does, but it's bigger, it's often more expensive, it's got much higher power requirements. And what we're looking at is the Internet of Things, the IoT. And with the IoT, it's all about things, and quite often the power requirements of those things are quite tight. We want things to be able to run on batteries, for example, or to be very, very small. So the Raspberry Pi, while fantastic, didn't really do what we wanted to look at. So today what we're going to do is share some of the knowledge I found out about IoT. And like I say, some of this is just simply things that I wanted to know and was not immediately available to me. Particularly when we look at the way devices communicate. We're then going to use an emulator to build some of the circuits, a little bit different to the ones that are normally available. Just so I had to find a few things out and figure out how to do a few things which weren't immediately obvious. So here's very much introductory level. And I certainly don't claim to be an expert, and I have been known to make mistakes in these things. We'll talk about what we've done so far. We'll build a bit more on the emulator. And hopefully, as long as people haven't got totally bored and run away, we'll talk about some of the things that we could actually get the Arduino platform to do. And what we want to try and do is build a bit of conversation in the chat as we go through there. So we are going to have to use an emulator because I can't guarantee that everyone that's here today has got an Arduino in front of them. I have a disturbingly large number of Arduinos on my desk in front of me and similar devices. But the emulator puts us in a very safe position because it means that we're all starting from the same place, and it, generally speaking, doesn't have any issues as long as we follow the rules it expects. The Arduino can be a bit temperamental about communicating with the host computer, for example, and the emulator doesn't have that kind of problem. So the first thing I want to discuss really is the whole internet thing, because there's no point of having IoT without the internet. So it's the things we can communicate with, which makes it such a powerful, rather than just a device that stands alone and actually being able to communicate, gives it so much more power. And what I wasn't sure about was how actually do we get our little processor, our chip, which can be as small as, I don't know if we can see this on this thing, but that tiny little black chip there is pretty much Arduino compatible and it's absolutely tiny. So how do we get things like that to communicate with other devices? Be it via the internet or via its own intranet or LAN or whatever, what do we do? And I found there's actually a surprisingly large number of methods. So we've got something called Ethernet, which is what, maybe not the majority of computers now, but certainly a few years ago, the way the majority of computers communicated was by plugging a cable into the back of the computer and plugging the cable into a router or into another computer and communicating that way. And this is perfectly possible to do with an Arduino or similar microcontroller. It's really fast. You know, we can talk about gigabit speeds these days. It's very simple. It's relatively easy to program, but we do have to have wires, and it's quite chunky and clunky, and probably not that useful these days. But for simple things, it can be very, very useful. Infrared, anyone that had a mobile phone in the late 90s, early 2000s, had infrared on their phone. And most people that have TVs have infrared on their remote controls. Obviously, those of us with children won't have those because if your kids are anything like mine, they'll have lost the remote control. But infrared is actually quite a useful way of communicating. And it's useful because it uses very low power. It is slow. It's only obviously line of sight, but it is an effective way to communicate in certain circumstances. You may have heard of RFID, radio frequency identification. And this is, again, it can be a great way of communicating certain things. It is small amounts of data. It's very low distance, as in touching or almost touching, but it can be passive. It can be active, but it can be passive, which means that you can read data from something which has no sort of power source, which can be really useful. Anyone that's played with microbits will know or may know about radio. So I'm not just talking about a great big mass sticking out of the top of a hill, but even small devices such as the microbit can communicate through radio. It's low power, low distance. If you want more distance, you have to have high power. And you know, if you want to go look at the BBC's power bills, it's a significant amount of power it takes to transmit long distances. The speed can be relatively slow. You may require licensing, but the simplicity for using it on some devices such as the microbit is fantastic. Moving onwards, we've got something called Bluetooth, which is I'm sure everyone's heard of these days. It's very similar to radio in some of the ways it works. It's lower distance than Wi-Fi, but it requires a lot less energy than Wi-Fi. It's much slower, so Wi-Fi is generally about 54 megabits per second. Bluetooth, a good Bluetooth connection, you're looking at probably about 3 megabits per second. These things do vary depending on what technologies you're using. But the standards are fairly slow, but the power requirements are a lot lower. And of course, these days. So we know we can stream sound from our mobile phones to our headphones, for example, using Bluetooth, and it works really nicely. So it's a credible technology. Something called BLE, which I discovered relatively recently. So this is Bluetooth Low Energy, I think it's called. Could be wrong, but it's based on the Bluetooth standard, but uses lower power, lower bandwidth, lower speed. It's no good for real-time data, but for small amounts of data, for quick little updates and things like that, it's a very, very useful communication. Moving on, I mentioned Wi-Fi, which is obviously wireless network access. It's a global standard, which is fantastic. It can be beyond line of sight, so it can go through walls. The distance is relatively short. Anyone, again, with a Wi-Fi connection in the house will probably find it's just about, but not quite long enough to reach the furthest distance you want to go. So it'll generally get around the house, give or take. but it's better than Bluetooth. It's not as good as some other things. It can be relatively complex and it's quite insecure. So depending on what you're wanting to transmit, to communicate, it can be a problem. The bandwidth is low, so it's not as fast as Ethernet. It can suffer interference, but it's a very, very useful technology because of the simply because the amount of support it gets. And then what we call cellular data, which is the same thing your mobile phone uses. 5G particularly is very, very high data rates, very long distance, very high power costs in terms of how much battery power it would use. The data costs can be really expensive. And to give you an idea of that, there was I think it was a Russian group of scientists were monitoring an eagle or some eagles, and they had a cellular data package on that. And the eagles were flying around, and they were monitoring where the eagle was going by the data. And unfortunately, the eagle flew across China, and I think it ended up in Kazakhstan or something like that. And they actually ran out of money. They ran out of credit on their account because it was so expensive going internationally with cellular data. And luckily, the providers gave them a better deal. They gave them a better cell plan and managed to track the eagle again. But it was incredibly expensive. We used the entire project's budget in, I think it was about 10 days. So it's something that needs to be considered. And finally, there's something called LP1, which is a new one to me. And it's based on cellular technology, but often unlicensed. It uses reduced power. There's reduced power requirements. It's got a better range than a lot of things, low data rates, so it's relatively slow. But it is the up-and-coming methodology for standalone IoT devices. So if you don't spend any time in Birmingham, you may see some cameras stuck on top of all the traffic lights and things. And those cameras are using LP1 to monitor certain things for an IoT project. So how do you choose this? And it entirely depends on the needs of the project. Obviously, not all projects need to transmit data at all, but you need to balance out the cost, the speed, the distance, and the power requirements, and figure out which one's the best approximation for what you're wanting to attain with your project. So there is no black and white single answer. But I mean, I didn't know about half of these in detail until I started reading into it. So if you're interested in IoT, you need to be aware of the different options. So that's enough talking for me. I think I've been speaking 15 minutes, which is way too long for me, really. So what we're going to do is we're going to make something today, something really simple. We're going to use a website called Tinkercad. Tinkercad is free. All you need is, as Soraya mentioned, you need a Google account to sign into it. And we're going to create a nice simple circuit. And that, not the circuit on the screen, I'm going to create that as a demonstration before moving you on to onto a tutorial which you can follow through at your own speeds. So Tinkercad is a really wonderful tool to let us try things out and learn how to do stuff. So hopefully you're going to be able to still see my screen. I'll just swap over here. So I've already signed into Tinkercad, and you see it's by Autodesk, who've made some over the years. But we're going to circuit and create a new design, create a new circuit. So I'm going to have to make just internet connection to keep up these days. So the reason I want to demonstrate it, it took me a few goes to figure out how to, just the nuances of using software. It's not difficult, but there's a few things that you have to, it takes you a while to figure out, and I wanted to try and save other people that effort. So we're going to use the search technology here, the search box here, to find the bits we need. So we need an Arduino. So I'm just going to type in Arduino, and we've got one there. We can just drag and drop that onto our screen, so we can use that. It's really very slow. Gosh. There we go. Oh, we end up with 2. So I'm just going to try and move them out of the way. We'll just ignore him. We don't need it. We're going to grab what we call a breadboard. Now, anyone that's ever played with any sort of electronics will probably know what a breadboard is. But what this lets us do is it lets us just plug our components in, connect them up with wires. We don't have to worry about soldering or anything like that. And it just makes our lives a lot easier. So I just put a very small breadboard in there. Later on in the project, we're going to use a larger one, which has got some rails. But what you need to see is that this column here, I'll put my mouse over, is joined together. And then this column's joined together. And then this column's joined together. And this column's joined together. So anything you put in to these 2 pins, for example, will be joined as if you soldered them together. So now we've got that, we're going to need a little LED. So that'll be a little light that we can show lighting up. We've got one there. So by dragging this LED over, we can just plop it into the breadboard, and it then connects. So the left-hand leg, which is the cathode, is connected now down to all these pins. The anode, which is the right-hand leg, is connected to all these pins. And we're going to put in a resistor. Now, the reason we use resistors when we're playing with LEDs, I'm sure what I've done there, I've just twisted it, I think. Oops. So if you take a resistor, an LED, and connect it to a battery or to a power source from an Arduino, what will happen very quickly is that LED will be really, really bright. And then if it's more than about 3.5, 4 volts, it will become very, 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 very bright, and then it'll start making smoke, and then it'll burn your fingers. And then if you happen to be, and I'm speaking purely figuratively here, if you happen to be in a school, it will set off those fire alarms, and you'll have some very difficult conversations with the boss. So we put a resistor in to reduce the amount of electricity getting to the light, to the LED, so that it doesn't set on fire. Now we're going to, we can set whatever that is. So the amount of resistance, the amount of squeezing of the power, if you like, it does, is measured in ohms. And generally a good one for an LED is around about 220 ohms. So that is that excellent Amiga symbol there. So we're just going to change that. So we've now got a 220 ohm resistor. And we're going to have to connect these things up to the Arduino. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a cable from, should we say, pin 5, I think that is. Oh, pin 4. So I'm going to click on pin 4. I'm going to click at the bottom of the LED. And that's a bit messy, so I can just double click. I can move that around to make it look nice and neat. And because that's where the power is going to be coming from, it's generally accepted to make that to be red. So the electricity is now going to come out of pin 4, run down the red wire into the resistor, going to jump this gap. So that gap there, so that we can have things running up and down without short circuiting themselves out. So we're going to run up here through the resistor to be reduced down and into the anode on the positive side of the LED. Now to make a circuit, we have to then take the electricity back to ground. So I'm going to click again at the bottom of the cathode, and I'm going to connect that to one of the GND or ground sockets on the Arduino. Again, we can just double click to make that a bit neater. I really don't like wonky cables. So we'll go up there. I'll have one final little elbow there just to make it nice and tidy. And again, it's generally accepted to make those be black wires. So the electricity flows into the red and then back out in the black to ground. Now what we need to do, at the moment it's not going to do much, so we need to actually do some programming. So we click on code. We're not interested in these blocks, so we're going to switch to text. What that does, that lets us actually use proper Arduino code to do some programming. Now it's actually put this in for us already. And what we're saying is that when I first started the Arduino, I'm going to set pin 13, which is all the way over there, to be an output pin, so I can push something out of the Arduino. So we're going to have to change it to pin 4, so we've changed that. So it's going to be pin 4. And then what it's going to do, it goes into a loop. So this loop runs over and over and over and over and over again. And again, it says, okay, I'm going to write a high value, so an on value, if you like, to pin 13. So again, I'm going to change it to pin 4. We're going to wait 1,000 milliseconds, which is 1 second. Then I'm going to write a low value, an off value. So we'll change that to pin 4. And then going to wait 1,000 milliseconds again, and then go around the loop and around and around and around. Now, hopefully I haven't messed anything up. We can press start simulation. You'll see the cable will come in, plug the Arduino in, and hopefully the light should flash on and off. Now you can just about see this on my screen. I don't know if it's come through on the page you guys can see or not, but the LED is getting slightly brighter and then slightly duller, and slightly brighter and slightly duller. So I'm going to stop that. Hopefully you've seen some of the some of the little ways to put things together. And the thing to do now is look at actually you guys that are in the room doing some of this yourself. So this is meant to be an interactive project, and it took us about 20 to 30 minutes last time we ran it. So what we'll do is I'll put you I'll put the links you need to be able to do this into the chat, and then I'm just going to sit here and wait. And just anybody that wants to either ask a question or needs some help or finishes and wants to actually converse about that is we can now have that conversation. I did mention earlier on that my background is as a computing teacher, and I'm a big firm believer that the most important things to do when you're learning a new technology or learning anything new is, first of all, make mistakes, own those mistakes, deal with the mistakes, and think and learn from them. So it's absolutely great if people do get things wrong and they want to come and talk about those issues. That's a really powerful thing. And the other thing is to then talk about what you've done and actually what it means and what can do with it. So we're going to create a light sensor that turns an LED on when the light gets darker. And that's a little bit harder than it sounds, because the sensor we use actually will give you a larger value as it gets brighter, and we need to invert that. So I'm going to put a link in the chat window that will take you to a tutorial. I'll also put the link in the chat window to Tinkercad itself, so you can link onto that. And then the idea is that you guys go through that, and like I say, come back to the chat window as much as you need to. So first I'm going to just put the Tinkercad link in. I'm just trying to copy that from another page for you. And then the actual link for the tutorial is actually going to be the same page I used for the UK RAS for the Robotics Week. So there's a walkthrough there for the IT workshop that I produced. There's also at the top there's a recording of the workshop, which is facing to this. But the walkthrough, there's a PowerPoint version, a PDF version, and if you prefer, there's a video version on YouTube as well. And then at the bottom, I've actually pasted the code you need there. Now, I think it's a better plan to type in code rather than copy and pasting. But if anyone gets towards the end and they're struggling with time, then please feel free to copy and paste if they need to. So that's me for talking, done for a little while. The final circuit you're building should look like the one on the screen. You'll see that I've tried to keep the wires nice and neat and tidy. I think it makes it easier to understand. So I'm going to stop talking and let everyone that's listening follow through those links and just come back to me as and when we've got a conversation to have about it.
Thank you. So I got it. I guess it's over to us. Do you time?
It'd be absolutely great, because I mean the thing that's different about obviously these web workshop is normally I can see people work. I know they're interacting. So yes, any questions, any comments, any thoughts, any ideas, please feel free to type terms of time, we've got about 10 minutes left of making before we stop and just have a look at what we could kind of do with this kind of circuit, or any ideas that come out of it. So if anyone is getting stuck, please feel free to let me know. And there is obviously, if you get towards the end, there is a little bit extra to work on as well there. Sharon, excellent question, thank you. If you just click on that, let me just see if I can get into to show you. If you click on the double click on the resistor, it should come up with this window here. So you do need to double click, I believe, and then you can just turn that to anything you need. So that will go to 220 mega ohms, for example, or you can type in a different value if you so need. There's quite a few things about this the software which are obvious once you figure it out, but until then, it's an incredibly painful thing to do. So, for example, it took me ages to figure out why I couldn't move anything before I realised you had to stop the simulation or to unplug the cable before you could change code. So yeah, the obvious is great until you figure it out. Thank you very much, Laura. The second part of the presentation is on the website, and that took in interesting laws of discovery. One of the things I had is I've got a lot of very cheap Arduinos which don't have very many inputs, and I also know how to have lots of buttons without using poly pins. So the second one actually shows you how to use. I think it works for up to 50 buttons on a single, or 50 switches, if you like, on a single input pin. So yeah, it's really interesting learning about these things. I'm by no means an expert about Arduinos or Tinkercad. What I am is very, very excited about playing with things and figuring stuff out. So I've learned loads, just in the last few months, I've learned loads and loads about Arduinos. And I recommend everyone does so because they're really good fun. That's great news, Sharon. I'm developing software far longer than I can remember. I started when I was 7, and still, when I create something that I've not done before and it works for the first time, it's such a wonderful feeling. I think really is the enjoyment for me is the fact that I can put these wires together and a few components that I'm learning about all the time, and then it works, and it's such a positive feeling, and it's such a simple little circuit as well. So obviously things get a lot more complex than this, but even such a simple circuit is been talking for ages, so I'm really glad that you told me this. So I'm going to try and show you the final circuit and what's working, and try and talk through why it works the way. Best way for me to get my head around what's happening. So what we've got here is we've got what we call a photoresistor, and this is simply, if you think of a resistor.
Would you be able to share your screen? I'm not sure we can see something. We just see your head talking, but we can't see your screen.
Oh,
unless it's just.
It says it's a little screen share on.
I can't see anything. It's just a black screen. We can see your screen in the audience. Okay, so they can't see it, not me. That's fine. No, that's fine. If they can't see it, that's fine, because I saw it already. No worries.
Thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate that, because I could spend hours trying to figure that out. So, okay, what we've got here, we've got a photoresistor. And the way I think about resistors, A-level physics, and it's not the best analogy, but if it's like water going down a hose pipe. If you squeeze that hose pipe and make it a bit less water gets through. And resistor kind of does the same thing. It stops so much, I'm going to use the word electricity or power getting through. Now there are, we can talk about volts and amps, all sorts of things which are important to know, but for this simple circuit as an analogy, the resistor is stopping so much getting through. So the less gets through, the less our LED, the less light our LED shows. And this photoresistor adjusts how tight it squeezes depending on how bright the light is reading it. So basically, with the sun or the ambient light, at the moment it thinks it's very, very dark, and I can drag this over here to make it think it's very, very bright. And you can just see there my LED has got dimmer. It's very, very gradual differences, and I'm not sure how it shows on the screen share. But if I turn it back to dark again, the LED should get a little bit brighter. So what's happening here is we've got power coming out of pin 3 and it's around the red light, through the resistor, doesn't burn anything, blow anything up, through the LED, and then back to ground. And the Arduino is able to adjust how much power it sends through there, depending on the instruction we give it. What's important is this other half of the circuit with the resistor. So we've got power running out of the 5 volt, so that's a standard 5 volt output, into the photoresistor. And then what it does, it then runs through there, and via this this resistor here, which is quite a strong one, it then runs down to ground. And that's what we call a pull down resistor, and that means that basically a nice flat signal. So if regardless of what the resistor is recording, it gives us a nice stable signal. If we remove that, things can fluctuate, and you get kind of bouncy inputs, which make things a bit difficult. We've also got this green cable here. The green wire runs to pin A0, which means analog, which is a continually variable input. And that reads how much power is getting through this resistor. So the more light there is, the less resistance there is, so therefore the higher value we get comes through this green wire into A0. We read that, and then what we have to do in the code is we have to take that value, which ranges between 0 and 1023, I think it is. So there's 1024 values. And we have to map that across to a reading the LED can understand. And I had to play with that a bit to get a sensible kind of value that worked. So it maps those numbers across and outputs that as a kind of percentage of the total value it can output out of pin 3 to light up the LED. And that's just kind of the way I talk through it for myself to understand what's happening. Now, like I say, I've played quite a few different circuits recently, and actually being able to talk through a process and understanding things like this pull-down resistor, which you see mentioned all over the place in Arduino forums and tutorials, without anybody actually telling you that all it does is it just means that it will flatten things down to ground so that you don't get any kind of bouncy readings. And then it allows you to read a positive value off the green wire. That's all it's really doing. By talking these circuits through for myself, I kind of understand what's happening. Now, I don't necessarily need to use the terminology that you'll see experts using, although I understand it now that I've learned a lot more. I don't need to use that to understand what's happening. So this kind of thing can be, this could be maybe a light for a fridge. It could be an artificial lighting for plants, for a terrarium, for your fish. It could turn the light on when the ambient light gets low in your fish tank, for example. So just this one circuit of reading something through a variable resistor and then inverting it and then putting an output based on that inverted input can, lead to all sorts of different ideas. And the UK RAS, the UK Robotics Week project we ran, we had all these people that were engaged in the workshops. Then had to come up with an idea. It didn't have to work; it had to be an idea using microbits or Arduino or something similar. And they then said that, this is why I've literally just had, this is the kit we're sending out to them. There's loads of stuff in there. I've just had the 18 winners' addresses sent to me to post them out. which is such amazing ideas people are coming up with, based on such simple ideas as running through a couple of these workshops and just seeing what's possible. So my final thing before I leave Sarai to say goodbye to everyone is say, first of all, thanks for joining in, but also really to encourage people, just play with these things. You know, you can pick up an Arduino for not a lot of money, for a few pounds. I mean, this kit that I'm sending out is about £80, 80 pounds, but that's got an Arduino, it's got 2 microbits, it's got a whole range of sensors, it's got breadboards, it's got wires, it's got crocodile clips, all sorts in there. So for a fraction of that, you can pick up the real bits of these if you don't want to play with an emulator, and you just start making things and see what happens and have some good fun. I will warn you, you can get addictive though. So Sarai, that's me finished. Also, I've got a comment from Sarah.
Thank you so much, Ollie. Thanks.
Sorry, if I can just respond to this this comment from Sarah. I've seen similar things, Sarah. If you want to drop me maybe drop me an email, I'll stick my email into the chat at the bottom here. And the reason I say that is my particular area of research interest is virtual reality in education. So I'd love to talk to you about that a bit further offline, maybe.
Do you have another question from as well?
Yes, certainly. So the Arduino website itself is fantastic in terms of learning how to use the Arduino. But it's not enough to learn how to do things which it doesn't cover. It doesn't teach you concepts, it teaches you how to do things. There is a website called Instructables, which I'll stick. Actually, I can't remember the website. I will double check that and stick that in the chat as well. Now, Instructables is not just Arduino. It's actually dozens, hundreds, thousands probably of projects people have done. I'll stick that in the chat as well. And a lot of them are Arduino based. Now, some of these are just, this is what I've done, but some of them are full-on tutorials explaining why things have happened. And a lot of the stuff I've learned about trying to connect a Wi-Fi module to an Arduino that I've been working on recently has come from there, and then that's led me on to various people's Tinkercads and things like that. So, but the best thing to do really is think, well, you know what would I like to do? Break it down into the bits that you need to be able to do, because there's going to be a number of probably component sections, and then figure that out once at a time, and just get in the forums, talk to people, chat to people, and try it out. Because really, I mean, particularly if you're going to use an emulator, but really the best way of learning is just try things out and see how it goes. But obviously, Instructables is great. The Arduino website is great, and feel free to drop me a line. Like I said, my email's there. My website is the Battle Arm website that the tutorial's on. There's lots from there you can look at as well if you want to. I'm delighted to chat to people about these things. I find it really exciting.
Good. Thank you so much, Ollie. I guess it's exactly 3 o'clock, and we don't have any other questions on the chat box. So I guess it's maybe a good time to just thank you very much, Ollie. Thank Emily. I guess she's still here. Thanks so much, Emily, for the interesting talk. So thanks for the audience. I think on average we had between 20 to 25 attendees on this session. It was great. I'm not sure if all of them managed to get their hands on, but if you still have questions or want to discuss anything, there's Ollie's email address on the chat box. I do hope you found the presentations interesting, and that there's something for you to take from this session. So thank you very much, and it's just time to say bye now then.